1 Corinthians 11:14 is an extended passage on church meetings. That's the subject. And as regards worship services, a pivotal verse is found in chapter 14, verse 26. What then, brothers? When you come together, each one has a hymn, a lesson, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Let all things be done for building up. The ESV Study Bible says, these verses give a fascinating glimpse into the kinds of activities that took place when the early church gathered as the body of Christ to worship the Lord. What we see here is a principle of participation. He starts off again in verse 26 by writing, what then, brothers? It does not say, what then, pastors? You'd think it would. It doesn't. But pastors are important. They are essential personnel. In Thayer's lexicon, in the definition of an overseer, he said it's one charged with the duty of seeing that things to be done are done rightly. It's interesting. In this extended passage on church meetings, chapter 11, 12, 13, 14, pastors are never once mentioned. And that seems to be because the focus is on the congregation as a whole, not simply on the leadership. But that said, pastors are very important. At the very least, they're the coaches on the sidelines that are being sure the plays are carried out correctly. And they can participate also along with the rest of the church. So it is very important that we have pastors who see that things are done rightly. But the focus, the spotlight, is on the church as a whole. So one of the jobs of a pastor is to make sure the church meeting follows the guidelines that are laid down in 1 Corinthians 11, 12, 13, and 14. So going back to 14:26, he writes, when you come together. What's the context? Well, I've already said it. Church meetings. So this is what church should be like. He's telling you. In 14:23, he talks about when the whole church comes together. So back to verse 26, what's true of those times? Each one has. That should be characteristic of a church meeting. Each one. Who's each one? Each one of the pastors? No. Each one of the brothers. A principle of participation. Now suppose we crossed out the words each one. Let's take that out and we'll put in only one. Which option would be more representative of a modern church meeting? Each one or only one? Well, you know the answer. If your church is characterized mostly by only one speaking instead of each one speaking, then you're out of sync with the New Testament example. Now next in our verse, we go to what could be called the prime directive. He says, let all things be done for building up. The NAS says for edification. The NIV says for strengthening. Proverbs 25:11 says, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. The key is that everything spoken be fitting. Ephesians 4:29 says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as good for building up. There it is again. As fits the occasion. It's got to be fitting, that it may give grace to those who hear. So the opportunity to speak in a church meeting doesn't mean that you necessarily should speak. It must be edifying. It must be fitting. It must give grace to those who hear. And that's where elders come in. They help people understand. They coach people so they know what's fitting and what's not.